They said you were a giant.
I am nothing, but I must be everything.
Okay, I like it. One and needed.
You know. You all know exactly who I am. Say my name.
Hey there. Welcome, folks. Welcome to the grand and wonderful show. Today we're going to be EFAPing a Ben Dunn video from Antarctic Press. His thoughts on Comicsgate and basically labels. Now, we have a bunch of people out there, and, in the dark corners of wherever that like to put themselves into little circles. Let's get a little music going. How is that? Is that a little high? It sounds high to me. There we go. Well, there's music playing, so if someone ever comes in or pipes in, we'll address the volume there. But anyway, oh yeah, Ben Dunn's video on Comicsgate. I guess there was a show around Austin that he went to, and he ran into, I guess by chance, his table was right next to, or adjacent to somehow in the vicinity of Mr. Eric July. And if you are not in the know, Mr. Eric July is the founder and owner of Rippaverse Comics. Think of him what you will. I guess he was a common contributor to Blaze TV. Highly political network and circle he ran in. But anyway, Ben gets into his thoughts on the longevity of the Comicscape movement, where they could possibly go, and maybe a way forward, because there's seems to be an aimless kind of movement. You know what I mean? It's not really gaining, but it's got its little core. They really don't seem to be pushing the boundaries or anything that I've really noticed. So there's a few that I pay attention to. Most of them, not really. A lot of them talk way too much. But, it is what it is. People are going to talk, whether you want them to or not. Prime example right here. All right. Well, let's put this video. There we go. We'll give that a full.
Hello everyone, this is Ben Dunn, your AP Sensei, founder of Antarctic Press, a comic book company established in 1985, celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. The year of our Lord, 2025. So, I got quite a bit of reaction from my last video comparing why I think Rippaverse is going to outlast Comicsgate. And some people may come under the impression that I dislike Comicsgate. No, I don't. Nothing can be further from the truth. I don't dislike Comicsgate. I don't like anybody. I mean, to be honest,
I totally get that. There's too much hate in the world, man. Don't hate anybody, At least just pity them.
the comic industry needs more people who are willing to take chances and to create comics. What I was trying to allude to was that the Comicsgate model as a business model is extremely flawed, and I'll tell you why. The difference is that Comicsgate is a movement. Originally, and people have said this, is that it was a consumer movement. It was meant to counter the shift in attitude in the big comic book companies, specifically Marvel and DC, in terms of what they were doing and what they were producing. I get that. If you...
All right, we're going to hop in real quick here and let's just put up that. Up on the screen we have, let's make this bigger. All right, there we go. We have the Wikipedia for Comicsgate. As of today, actually, I just did this. Looks like from the beginning they were a right-wing harassment campaign meant to oppose diversity and progressivism in North American superhero comic book in the North American superhero comic book industry. So we're not starting off good here. But yeah, I get it. You know, like when you start gender swapping, like the term is whitewashing when we make everybody in the movies white. Like Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai, even though in the movie it made sense why it was a white guy, but it's kind of, ugh. I guess a bunch of people got their panties in a bunch about Snow White being a, whatever girl. But, as far as I'm concerned, it's all pink in the middle, you know what I mean? It's a fucking cash grab. What the fuck are grown-ass men crying about Snow White and the fucking 7 not quite dwarfs because dwarfs is racist? But anyway, back to the Wikipedia here. It's a consumer protest that yada yada ran into some fucking Nazi. But we'll get into that when farther in the video here. But let's see. You guys have read that, right? All right, I've read it. But anyway, it ended up with online threats and actual vandalism of a store in Vancouver. That's got a problem with the white supremacy. I used to spend a lot of time in Canada. Around Toronto, Hamilton, and Ottawa. It isn't too bad, all over Ontario. But, mainly running back and forth between Detroit and Buffalo. But, points in between as well. But anyway, let's get back to Mr. Dunn here.
Like what a company is producing, you don't have to buy it. But if you do like what they're producing, then you will buy it. You will support it. And the comics was reaction. Now, the thing is that I was at the Big Bang of Comicsgate. I was there when it was born. Okay, yes, Enterprise was going to publish Jawbreakers. It was a title that was recommended to us by Brian Denham, who was keeping up. He was an editor, who still is an editor at Antarctic Press at the time. And I really was aware of Richard C. Myers. In fact, I followed his YouTube channel, quite religiously, because I thought what he was saying sort of resonated with a lot of people who were collecting comics at the time and who were big fans of Marvel and DC and hated to see the direction they were going. I'm an old school collector, reader, so I did not understand what they were doing. But, well, I'll take that back. I did understand what they were doing, and it was deliberate, and that's fine. I just chose not to support it. And Richard C. Myers seemed to reflect the feelings of a lot of old-time readers and collectors, and that we were very much against what they were doing. But the thing was, he also created a lot of enemies, is a word I'm thinking of. A lot of detractors, a lot of people who didn't like his style of criticizing the output of the big two. And okay. The thing was, it was effective. Richard C. Meyer garnered a huge audience, and he really played up on that. And I don't fault him for that. He knew what he was doing and he wanted to do it, and that's fine. Kudos to him to have the courage to do it. But he was also putting his money where his mouth was. He was creating a comic book. They challenged him to create his own comic, and he took up that challenge. And he created a book called Jawbreakers. And Jawbreakers was going to be an Antarctic Press comic. I was familiar with Jawbreakers. In fact, when I found out that Brian Dunn had picked up the title, I was actually very ecstatic. I was very happy that we had picked it up. I'll be honest with you. It was a, not only was it a good looking book. I had not read it at the time, but it not only was a good looking book, Brian assured me it was a very good read too, as well. So when we announced that we were going to do Jawbreakers, we thought we were going to have a lot of support for it. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Almost immediately, Antarctic Press, and specifically, the owner, my brother Joe, and was inundated with huge amounts of negative and hateful.
Yeah. About that negative and hateful backlash for picking up that book. Here, Mr. Vox Day, or Theodore Robert Beale. He was a prominent contributor to the, science fiction and fantasy writers of America. I get it. I'm a member of the World Science Fiction Society. It's all good. Pay your dues, and maybe someday, this guy here. However, he's a described as a far right white supremacist and misogynist, which now kind of all goes together. You know what I mean? At least that's what the Wall Street Journal says, and they are not a left-wing publication. Think of them at what you will. He was friends with this Meyer guy, and I'll have a bit more to play in this little story, which Mr. Dunn doesn't get into. But he didn't know the whole thing. Probably when it all went down, I doubt I doubt that Ben's a white supremacist. You know what I mean? But whatever. But yeah, this guy's a general dirtbag. This Vox Day. Anyway, back to our faffing
responses. And we hadn't, my brother had not realized, what kind of, I loathe this word, but it seems to fit the toxicity of what Richard C. Meyer had created in the comic book community. And when he got a call from Mark Waid, Mark Waid is not an unimportant individual. He is a very well-known legend in the comic book industry, and somebody that my brother respected quite a bit, and I respect quite a bit, both as a writer and as a creator. When he, called and expressed his concern about us doing Jawbreakers, that was really the final straw that broke the back, that we could not proceed with Jawbreakers, and we could not take the amount of backlash that was coming our way. And as a company, we have to make a decision whether or not this is going to benefit us, in the end, or is it going to hurt us in the end. And the decision was made not to publish Jawbreakers. And we contacted Richard Meyer, and told him,
which is a valid thing, that's bed with all the people. You lay down with dogs, you come for fleas, you know what I mean? Uh, but you know, a business's only purpose is to make money. You know, you might make a little money with catering to that particular audience, but where does it get you in the end? You know? But anyway, let's get back to Mr. Dunn.
And he was very agreeable to the situation, and he decided to go ahead and publish it on himself. So, because of that, it created a chain of events that led to the formation of Comicsgate. Now, the term Comicsgate, I think, was used, initially as a way to label what had happened to Jawbreakers and Richard C. Myers. And, it's actually, some people say it started with the Milkshake Girl photo. That probably was the genesis of the movement, but it certainly didn't create anything to the likes of what we see now, with Comicsgate. Now, I'm nothing.
Oh, yeah, if you don't know about the milkshake, I guess a bunch of crybabies were pissed off that they didn't get milkshakes. I believe it was over some lady named Flo passing. She was a big wig at DC, I think. Real contributor to the whole cause, because comics is a pretty big boys club. If I have any Comicsgate people in the audience, I would say, look around. You know what I mean? Well, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of equity.
Buy, you will support it. And the comics was reaction. Now, the thing is that I was at the Big Bang of Comicsgate. I was there when it was born. Okay, yes, Enterprise was going to publish Jawbreakers. It was a title that was recommended to us by Brian Denham, who was keeping up. He was an editor, who still is an editor at Antarctic Press at the time. And I really was aware of Richard C. Myers. In fact, I followed his YouTube channel, quite religiously, because I thought what he was saying sort of resonated with a lot of people who were collecting comics at the time and who were big fans of Marvel and DC and hated to see the direction they were going. I'm an old school collector, reader, so I did not understand what they were doing. But, well, I'll take that back. I did understand what they were doing, and it was deliberate, and that's fine. I just chose not to support it. And Richard C. Myers seemed to reflect the feelings of a lot of old-time readers and collectors, and that we were very much against what they were doing. But the thing was, he also created a lot of enemies, is a word I'm thinking of. A lot of detractors, a lot of people who didn't like his style of criticizing the output of the big two. And okay. The thing was, it was effective. Richard C. Myers garnered a huge audience, and he really played up on that. And I don't fault him for that. He knew what he was doing and he wanted to do it, and that's fine. Kudos to him to have the courage to do it.
Now, here's what I don't get. A bunch of collectors were angry that there were new things to collect. But anyway, personally, I think collecting is kind of, gross. But, I grew up with a couple hoarders. But anyway, back to the show.
But he was also putting his money where his mouth was. He was creating a comic book. They challenged him to create his own comic, and he took up that challenge. And he created a book called Jawbreakers. And Jawbreakers was going to be an Antarctic Press comic. I was familiar with Jawbreakers. In fact, when I found out that Brian Dunn had picked up the title, I was actually very ecstatic. I was very happy that we had picked it up. I'll be honest with you. It was a, not only was it a good-looking book. I had not read it at the time, but it not only was a good-looking book. Brian assured me it was a very good read too, as well. So when we announced that we were going to do Jawbreakers, we thought we were going to have a lot of support for it. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Almost immediately, Antarctic Press, and specifically, the owner, my brother Joe, and was inundated with huge amounts of negative and hateful responses. And we hadn't, my brother had not realized, what kind of, I loathe this word, but it seems to fit the toxicity of what Richard C. Meyer had created in the comic book community. And when he got a call from Mark Waid, Mark Waid is not an unimportant individual. He is a very well-known legend in the comic book industry, and somebody that my brother respected quite a bit. And I respect quite a bit, both as a writer and as a creator. When he, called and expressed his concern about us doing Jawbreakers, that was really the final straw that broke the back, that we could not proceed with Jawbreakers. And we could not take the amount of backlash that was coming our way. And as a company, we have to make a decision whether or not this is going to benefit us, in the end, or is it going to hurt us in the end? And the decision was made not to publish Jawbreakers. And we contacted Richard Meyer, and told him, and he was very agreeable to the situation, and he decided to go ahead and publish it on himself. So because of that, it created a chain of events that led to the formation of Comicsgate. Now, the term Comicsgate, I think, was used, initially as a way to label what had happened to Jawbreakers and Richard C. Myers. And, it's actually, some people say it started with the Milkshake Girl photo. That probably was the genesis of the movement, but it certainly didn't create anything to the likes of what we see now, with Comicsgate. Now, I'm nothing against Comicsgate as a movement. I feel like if it's something that is, if it's something that someone wants to do, then fine. No one's stopping you from doing it. We live in a country where you're able to just do whatever you want. And that's wherein lies the problem with Comicsgate as, a business model. As a movement, you are free to follow whatever dream you want. And if you want to use Comicsgate as a label to garner your sales up, then that's fine. And it seems to me that's what it is. It's just a movement. It's just a label to attach to a project in order to get the audience that supports Comicsgate. Now, it's a sizable audience. It's not tremendous what they were doing, but the thing was, he also, and he was very agreeable. No one's stopping you from doing it. We live in in a country where you're able to just do whatever you want. And that's wherein lies the problem with Comicsgate as, a business model. As a movement, you are free to follow whatever dream you want. And if you want to use Comicsgate as a label to garner your sales up, then that's fine. And it seems to me that's what it is. It's just a movement. It's just a label.
You gotta be careful what kind of labels you put on yourself, especially when you don't have control. You know what I mean? You can preach and preach, nothing but goodness. But someone else has that same label as you. You are them.
To attach to a project in order to get the audience that supports Comicsgate. Now, it's a sizable audience. It's not tremendously big. I will say that, just off the top of my head, based on sales I've seen, there's probably no more than maybe 4,000 people who are diehard, staunch Comicsgater. But that's a large amount of people, that can make a big difference on a campaign. Some say the magic number for a campaign is 1,000 people, 1,000 backers. If you get 1,000 backers and you keep 1,000 backers forever, you can go on for a very long time. And I'm not sure if that number is accurate, but I think that's what I've heard. And I've done the calculation. It looks like if you get 1,000 backers, you're going to do pretty well. Anything above that is going to be great. You're going to do fantastic. The thing is that Comicsgate is a loose, affiliation of several creators, with no real, no real person in charge. Because every Comicsgate creator can do whatever he wants, without the interference of another comics book creator. But they can still all use the same label. So if the behavior of one comics book creator is negative, there's not much the other comics creators can do, when they can pressure him. Yes, they can certainly, bear down and make them eventually leave. But for the most part, they can't really do much, as far as getting rid of any negative.
No one can stop anyone from doing nothing. Well, except for that one Tito, I guess. But anyway, I guess that's one of the fun new games the gate is up to. Anyway. All right. Let's go.
Negative influences in Comicsgate. Most of the people who've left Comicsgate have left on their own volition, because they disagreed with the way it's heading, or they just dislike the people that are in it. The thing is Comicsgate is not a business. See, that's the fundamental difference between Comicsgate as a whole and the Rippaverse. See, with the Rippaverse, you have one person in charge, Eric July. Everything stops with him. He makes all the decisions. He sets the agenda. He hires and fires people. He sets the direction of his company, and he's ultimately responsible for it. So as long as he is willing to keep going at it, his company will survive. And if, depending on how his products do, will thrive. And I think that, his business model, while definitely unusual, is proven to be highly successful. I'm not going to talk about, how much money they make. Personally, it's none of my business. My business is to see, how well Anarchic Press does. And looking at Eric July's model, there's something there that...
there's something there. The guy was a contributor on a cable TV. I don't know, like, was Blaze TV cable or was it just internet? I think it was Blaze. I think it was on some cable. But anyway, he had a built-in audience. There's an argument that what he's doing is just making merch, which, if he is, good for him, it's like, Jeff Bezos and Amazon and the boys, Amazon's just making merch, and that's a pulp culture, phenomenon. Got a bunch of little geeks running around wishing they were Homelander and such. But anyway, back to the fat thing.
Could possibly be, delivered over into Antarctic Press as well. We've been around for 40 years and we've seen a lot of things, and we'd like to think that we can adapt. We're not so rigid in our thinking, and that we can't make changes in order for the company to continue to survive. And there's a reason why we've been around for 40 years, because we are able to adapt and change. And I think another reason is that Eric July is a businessman. He said so many times, he claims to be, and that's something that is of fundamental importance. The thing about Comicsgate is as far as I know, there are several individual businessmen. Okay, they run their own little fiefdom in the Comicsgate kingdom. They do their own thing. They run their business as they see fit. All Comicsgate is a label. That's all it is. And as long as that label provides some value, it will remain. Once Comicsgate itself, as a label, becomes less attractive as far as garnering more and more business, then it will wane in importance. That's just the nature of things. If you want Comicsgate to survive as an entity, here is some things that I think would help. You don't have to take my advice. I'm just giving you what I've learned from experience. Comicsgate has...
Sensei says, man. Yeah. It's been doing it for 40 years. But anyway, here we go.
has to be a business. Okay, it has to incorporate. It has to have a head, a CEO or an editor-in-chief to oversee the quality, to oversee the deliverability, to oversee the costs of doing their comics. I mean, I'm sure Eric July, because he does so many comics, he gets a good rate on printing, because he can gang print. He probably gets a good rate on a lot of things because he can control, the method of how he's going to produce things. With Comicsgate, you have 5, 6, 7 different creators who all have their own little kingdoms, and they all go to various different printers, different things. Imagine how much they could save if they could just all gang print together at one printer, or combine their resources so that they all could thrive. But it's not that way, because who makes the decision and who does what is something that Comicsgate can't tolerate, because every single one has their own agenda, and that is where the weakness lies. It's
like ancient Persians and Greeks. Ancient Greece, man, it wasn't a country. It was like hundreds of little city-states, little countries that would have to come together. When they weren't busy raiding and trying to conquer each other, they had, they would have to come together to fight off the outside threat, which is Persia. And that's what the Comicsgate has coming at them. Yeah, there are a lot of great artists in the movement calling themselves Comicscape, but I don't know. That label might be less and less attractive. All right, back to Ben.
That they all have their own agenda, so there is no direction to Comicsgate other than the person who's in charge, which I presumably is Ethan Van Sciver, who I have great respect for. And to me, his success in terms of being able to sell comics is, quite enviable. However, he has one weakness, is not his inability to deliver his product on time. Now, some people may poo-poo that as being something that's unimportant, but in this case it is, because you're delivering a promised timely product, and people can only wait so long before they become irritated or frustrated, or discouraged by it.
I tell you what, man, I tried that drop shipping nonsense, and that ain't no joke. You've got your little core fanatics that are like, oh, take as long as it needs or whatever. Then you got the friendly people. It's like, hey, man, that's cool. Get it when you can, but years go by. Most people don't give a shit what you call yourself. They bought something, they fucking want it. That's the way the fucking world works. And with everything now, everything's going to take forever. With all these tariffs and the breakdown of basically Western society, which is looming. And we'll maybe do a podcast about the fall of the West here coming up before too long, because a lot of you dopes don't see what's going on. But anyway, back to Ben.
Can you imagine if any other product was delayed that long? I mean, back in the 1800s, it was common for people to wait months, maybe even years for a product, but this is a comic book. It shouldn't take years for a comic book to come out. We have a rule at Anarchic Press when we do Kickstarters or crowdfunders or Indiegogos or whatever, the book has to be complete before we will offer it, to our audience. Has to be complete, 100% complete.
Now, I've had this. I've backed a bunch of campaigns where you get that message, that update, like, oh no, my dog died, or my whatever died, or they fucking die. I don't know, man. Personally, you don't put something up for sale that ain't ready to be fucking shipped. That's just me, because you don't know what's gonna happen, like once that whatever check clears from whatever crowdfunding site you're on, you should be ready to send the order. But anyway,
every single crowdfunder Indiegogo that Anarchic Press does, and myself included, is 100% complete and ready to go the minute it's launched. And I think that is the model that Eric July is using. He's using that he's not going to launch anything unless it's 100% complete. He knows that it'll be delivered. And this is why people trust him, and this is what it comes down to, is trust. If people can't trust you to deliver your product on time, then you're eventually going to lose that trust. And it's going to affect your business. I'm not going to lecture or say anything about how Comicsgate runs its business, because that's really none of my business. But as a outside observer, who's been following a lot of this drama for a while, I feel I had to really interject into, the debate, the discussion, so to speak, and I really think that I want to see Comicsgate succeed, to be honest. I really do. But I don't think it will, based on its current trajectory. It just doesn't look like it's going to last.
an animal has no head, it ain't going nowhere, you know what I mean? You know, it got pushed in a direction. It had some heavy hitters in it for, you know, in the comic book world, which is small, niche of a niche of a niche, but, you know, they were quite talented, respected or despised, you know, for whatever. But you gotta have direction. You gotta have purpose. What's the goal?
It's that long. I mean, it could last another 5 years. It could last another 10 years. But eventually, it's going to go away. You know, because it cannot be sustained in its present model. You know, the difference is that Rippaverse, you know, is a legitimate business run by a person in charge. You know, if Jarek July, you know, were to somehow disappear tomorrow, his company would still continue. You know, someone would pick up the pieces and they would run with it because they know there's money to be made, you know, with Eric July's Rippaverse. You know,
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. You know, it's a solo proprietorship, but you know, it's not like there's a bunch of VPs sitting around. I don't know. Well, like, unless, you know, maybe he's got a fucking brother. Like Ben's got a brother. Who knows? You know, second in command. I don't know what the fuck. But anyway, you know, he's kind of the face of the thing, so it might go on in some form. Anyway.
Same cannot be said with Comicsgate. You know, EVS is the self-proclaimed leader of the movement. You know, but he really is not so much as a leader as he is a figurehead. You know, if he was a leader, you know, he would, you know, try to direct where Comicsgate is going and how to do it. Unfortunately, he's not setting a good example by having his books be late and his product, and he's constantly putting out new product, you know, without fulfilling the previous product. We will never do that. Enterprise will never, never release a book that's not 100% complete. You know, 100% complete. You know, and we have a good track record. You can look at all our campaigns. Every single one of them has been fulfilled, unless they didn't, unless they didn't meet their funding goal. You know, so yeah, you can say all sorts of things about me. You know, I don't care. You're allowed to say that. You know, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because.
And you've been doing it for 40 fucking years, man. You guys gotta, you know, that deserves a bit of respect, man. 40 years. What was it, 1985? I nominated that guy for a Hugo Award.
It makes me happy. And really what it comes down to is really what makes you happy. You know, if you're happy with what you're doing, then don't let anyone tell you to do something different. You know, and yes, it's a fact. You know, I am a little, you know, envious about some of these successes, but you know what? I look at it as a good thing, because whenever a comic book is successful, it means people are buying them, people are wanting to get them, people will support them, and that to me is a positive thing. You know, I love that. You know, I love to see every single, if I had my way, I would have every single comic book creator have, you know, huge success. I want people to have success, you know.
Everyone deserves success. Anyone that tries, you know. That's what crowdfunding basically is right now. Just, you know, looking for some kind of acknowledgement for trying.
I will grant you that Internet Press is not a big company. No, you know, we've had our successes back here and there over the decades. You know, what keeps us going is our commitment not only to the comics as an art form, but as a business. I don't have to worry too much, as far as me financially, because I get a salary. I usually get a salary, and then I supplement my salary with occasional crowdfunding projects, and I'm happy with that. One of the fundamental things is that also a big thing is that Eric July probably reinvests all his money back into the company, or not all his money. I'm sure he pays himself, but I'm sure he reinvests the profits from his company back into the company, and that's what it will allow it to grow. This is the another fundamental difference is that Comicsgate does not reinvest its money into the movement. It reinvests its money into the individual creators.
Well, because that would be socialism.
Because that is what their, I'm assuming their main source of income is. And as long as they can maintain that cash flow, then they're going to keep at it. Once that cash flow stops, then where are they now? That's the fundamental difference. Same with Anarch Press. We take all the profits that we make, not only to pay our bills, and things like that, but we also reinvest it into finding new creators, to find new ways to expand our market, and just basically try to make the company, as big as possible. Now, we're learning that the paradigm is changing, and we have to change with it. So my biggest thing is that I am not against Comicsgate. If you get the impression that I am, not. I don't hate it. I don't, but I don't support it either. And I also feel like if you want a little bit of advice from me, I think that some changes need to be made if you want it to continue to succeed. So that's really all I had to say. Until next time, this has Ben Dunn signing off.
All right. That was Ben Dunn. He doesn't hate Comicsgate. I don't hate Comicsgate. Can't hate something that doesn't really exist. You know what I mean? All right. Let's see what we've got. We have a Canadian Shield 3. I have a link for that. If anyone would, let's see here, fund my comic. We're going to put that in the chat. There we are. If you guys get a chance, if anyone sees this, go check out my friend Rick Pfeiffer's book, The Canadian Shield 3. It is part of my crooked verse, meaning I'm in it. I think the number is 21 now. I'm in 21 books. All right, put that back. All right. Now we're coming to the part of the show where we have our musical guest, I guess. I'm going to sit back and enjoy our needle drop theater.
follow me home as she leans across and shake a little salt and pepper, and we'll fall back to yours. Hey, you, what you doing over there? See what's on your mind is on mine too. Hey, you, what you doing over there? See what's on your mind is on mine too. Everybody's calling it the cab coming down the hill. Got me up a little twisted. Let's get real. Jump in the back, get a little naughty, baby. Feel a little tipsy. Feel a little tipsy. Fumble for your keys, trying to get the lock, baby. This is where you dance and be all cheeky. Hey, you, what you doing over there? See what's on your mind is on mine too. Hey, you, what you doing over there? See what's on your mind is on mine too.
All right. That was Dope Lemon. And go check them out. Link is in the description. Well, let's see. I think YouTube is angry. YouTube. All right. Yep. We'll see what they have to say. I put the links everywhere. But hey, if they didn't want people to say other people's names, they wouldn't give us the ability to. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show. And
They said you were a giant.
I am nothing, but I must be everything.